Good morning, everybody. Here we are. Lord blessed us with another wonderful day and an opportunity to be in His Word, to get our dose of it, to get our day kicked off right, and hopefully it will help every day after this. This morning, I want to look at something that Paul wrote to the Philippians. I think it's a very important lesson for us to really understand and to live by. Paul says this in Philippians, the 3rd chapter, and in verse 16. Says, "Nevertheless, whereto we have already attained, let us walk by the same rule, let us be of the same mind." We're going to look at some verses here right after this here in just a moment. But let us appreciate what Paul is saying here is that we need to be walking by the same rule. You know, if I had a dollar for every time I've been asked over the years, is like, why are there so many churches? Well, it's very simple, is that people want to walk by their same rule. Baptists have their rule, the Pentecostals have their rule, the Catholics have their rule, the Mormons, they have their rule, and so on and so forth. But Paul says that we need to walk by the same rule. That means there's only one way of doing things. That's what's implied by that. He says, let us walk by the same rule, let us mind the same thing. In other words, let us think the same way. Is that we should always come up with the same answer. And if two people are talking about Bible things and they've got a different answer or take on something, well, one thing is for sure, at least one person is mistaken, maybe both, but they can't both be right. They both can't be walking by the same rule. I want us to appreciate something that Paul says following this, verse 17. He says, "Brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk so as ye have us for and so." Right? So whatever we do, Paul says you've got us apostles to look for. That's the example. That's how we do it. So let's just think about that for just a moment. If Paul is saying that the apostles are the examples for us to follow, that's the blueprint of the same rule. Let us consider this. Is there any evidence that the apostles used musical instruments in their worship? Is there any evidence that the apostles told someone to pray the sinner's prayer to be saved? Is there any evidence that the apostles told someone to just simply believe and let Jesus into your heart? Is there any example by the apostles that there should be carnivals and concerts and bouncy houses and car washes and barbecues and all these other types of things sponsored by the church? It's just a simple question. If Paul says that we're the example, and their example, Paul says we need to follow, where can we find any examples of any such things that the apostles did? I have yet to find it, but maybe I'm missing. Maybe there's something I haven't seen. But enlighten me. I like barbecues and potlucks and carnivals and whatnot. Just as much as the next guy. But when it comes to the church, can we find the apostles setting an example in even the slightest way that would take us to such a conclusion? But notice this. He goes on. He says, "For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ." Oh my. "Whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who mind earthly things." So what we find here, what Paul is saying here in just about 4 verses, this is a great contrast. He says we need to walk by the same rule. We need to be thinking the same way. We need to follow the example of the apostles. And if we are not, then what's the problem? We are walking contrary and we become the enemy of Christ. We can be talking about Christ, but if we're not walking by the rule, well, a lot of people don't like that word in religion. Rule. We don't like to be ruled. We want to do what we want. We just give me Jesus, but I don't want to give him anything. Paul, here's this thing we need to understand. Paul says we are to walk by the same rule. We are to be of the same mind. We are to follow their example and everything that they did and everything that they taught. And if we don't, and if we aren't, then we become the enemy of Christ. We can walk contrary to Christ. He says, verse 19, whose end is destruction, whose God is bread. In other words, we're doing things what we want to do. And Jesus says something about this in Matthew the 7th chapter, verses 21 through 23. He said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but those who do the will of my Father. He also says, also within that, is that there's going to be many say to me that day, Lord, Lord, have we not cast out demons, done many signs, and all these other types of things? He said, yeah, but I don't know you. Why? They weren't walking by the right rule. They were walking by their own rule. That's what Paul's talking about here in verse 19. They're walking by their own rule. They're not following the example of the apostles. They're walking by their own rule. Their God is their belly. It's what they want to be true. It's what they want to be right. And notice what he says. Their mind is on earthly things. In other words, it's about themselves. But how many people can we get here? It's all about the scoreboard, so to speak. It's all about a bigger building. It's not about, we don't want to judge anybody. We don't want to point anybody's sin out to them. We just want to get them here, make them feel good about themselves, and give them Jesus of puppy dogs and kitty cats and warm little butterflies. But Paul is saying here, is if we're not walking by the same rule, and notice what we have here. He says they're enemies of Christ. Why would we want someone to remain the enemy of Christ? Why would we want to do that? By telling them things that the Bible just does not teach. But see, that's where it takes us when we're not walking by the same rule. Yes, there's rules in the Bible. There's rules in worship. There's rules in doctrine. There's rules in morality. There's rules in the way that we live. All right? There's rules all the way through. People don't like that word, but it's still a Bible word. And we have to follow that teaching. And if we don't, if we can't find the example of the apostles and what we would do and what we hold and what we believe, my friends, we have become the enemy of Christ. And that does not equate into salvation. It equates into destruction. There's your dose of God's word today. And let us strive to walk by the same rule. Let us not mind earthly things. Let our belly not be our God. In other words, this is what I like. This is how I want to do it. This is what pleases me. But how about we just come back to the Bible and find out what that rule, what that pattern, what that blueprint is, so that we don't hear those words come Judgment Day. Depart from me. I never knew you. Why? Because you work lawlessness. You didn't do it my way. You did it your way. Hey, I hope we give you some things to think about. Lord willing, we'll get back tomorrow and we'll get us another dose of God's Word. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you then.